by my wonderful special guest, because every guest on this show is a wonderful special guest. Michael O.
Michael O. in my kindergarten again?
Whose political philosophical disposition isn't quite clear to me, though, but he will be presenting opposing arguments against anarchism. Earlier I asked him to write out some of the clear and or potential issues that could arise from voluntarism or a free society. So, would you like to touch base on anything before we...
Would criticisms of
Anarcho-Capitalism?
yes, also be valid?
Sure. Yes.
Because I know you support those, not ANCOM.
That's alright.
So I probably won't make any comments about ANCOM.
Okay. Well, let's begin with
Alright, so
item 1.
item 1 on the list.
Yeah.
Voluntarism does not mean consent. I think it kind of sneaks it in, but it doesn't necessarily mean consent.
Okay. Example.
Given if you sign a contract voluntarily, but there's a consequence where, let's say, you become a slave or something like that. Now you voluntarily made that decision, so it doesn't necessarily mean the consequences you have consent towards that.
Okay. Being involuntarism, contracts are very important. It's how people go about delegating rights that they have to others. So, for instance, I'm going to let you take care of defending me and my interests and my assets, instead of, me staying at home all day, with the wife and the shotgun. So, as part of honoring contractual obligations, yes, you could technically sign away your individual rights. I suppose you could become a slave if you agreed to it. My advice would be to always read what you're signing. I don't really know what much else to say about that. You should read what you're signing.
So you would agree that voluntarism doesn't mean consent?
Well, the signing of the contract is in of itself consent.
It's not consent. They're voluntary to make that action. That's voluntarism.
Yeah, you're agreeing to contractual clause.
But making that decision doesn't necessarily mean you can have consent towards.
It's like,
the outcome.
okay, let me give you an example. It's kind of like eating Mexican food. Okay, so we go to a restaurant, we eat Mexican food. It tastes great. Now, part of that contract, part of that eating that Mexican food is, well, do I consent to having diarrhea later on? Well, no, because I didn't outright say that that's what I wanted. But because I had Mexican food, what I know about Mexican food, what we know about contracts, is that it's important to know what could happen from signing them. What could happen from eating Mexican food? Well, I could get diarrhea, which is why it's important that I weigh the pros and cons of eating Mexican food, that I value eating Mexican food enough to say, well, it's okay if I get diarrhea. So, in that sense, even though my getting diarrhea is ultimately my fault.
That's item 1. I'll skip to item 3 because item 3 kind of went along with item 1.
Okay, that's fine.
In that, you had said you could sign away your rights, correct?
Yes, you could.
So, any basic human rights you could sign away.
As long as
you could
they were yours.
Voluntarily, you could sign. So, given that you can sign away your rights, any human rights, do human rights are they able to exist under voluntarism?
Human rights?
Explicit human rights.
Such as?
Let's see what we recognize. Freedom to live, or to not be a slave. I mean, you can't own someone else. Or, I don't know, what else would we accept as human rights? Should probably have written that down.
Okay. That's a good question. I'm not sure if that. Um, I'm not sure how much that coincides with voluntarism. Uh, it, I suppose, though, theoretically you could, but the legitimacy of that contract is ultimately would be determined by the courts.
So the courts would be able to decide what human rights are and aren't, or what?
The ones that you choose, yeah.
So how would they come to that determination?
Well, you get volunteers to come to that determination.
So you would, so what? Are you saying that the courts would not recognize someone's ability to own someone else, or they would?
Well, if they signed away their rights, then they probably would. But,
Okay, so it's okay for people to own other people.
if the person agrees to it, then yeah, I mean, it's just like it's okay to kill yourself. If you sign away that right to kill yourself, saying, well, you can kill me, then I mean, then yeah, technically that's okay, and there's not really anything you can do about that. Unless you could prove that the agreement was involuntary upon he who signed away his rights.
So
But
if I own someone else, I can make them do something that they don't want to do.
only if that's specified in.
But I have ownership over them. They're my slave.
Yes, but here's the thing with contracts, though. Slave doesn't really mean anything other than, you can say, oh well, I own you now. You have to specify. You have to specify that how they would serve you, basically.
How they would serve me? Why?
Yeah.
But they've signed away their rights to own themselves. So I own them.
Well, it would have to go along with the contract. It'd have to be whatever you choose to do would have to be viable with the contract that that person signed.
It just says I own them though. That's all it says. I get to own them. And they do what I say.
Oh, okay. Well, then why would they have a problem? What's the issue then? If that's what they want.
So I'm getting at is the legitimacy would say you would say it would be likely that they would hold that up because the person agrees to it then.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have to hold it up because there wouldn't be an issue. If that's what they want, then what's the problem?
Well, then the problem is I can make you something you don't consent to doing.
No, you did consent to doing it.
No.
Yeah.
You're saying, okay, so if someone is a slave, automatically there's something that they could do that they enjoy everything that they do?
No, that doesn't necessarily mean they enjoy it.
So
I mean, there are plenty of things that I consent to doing, but I don't like doing. But I mean,
you consent to doing?
Yeah.
Like what?
Okay, well, interacting with particular people that I don't like very much,
Okay.
I do that voluntarily. There's nobody forcing me to do that. It doesn't mean I necessarily like doing it. I mean, it's like, imagine when somebody died, somebody you cared for very much, and now you have to go through the process of determining where their assets go if they have or have not written those out, and how their burial process, and you have to talk to people, and this is all up to you. It's all voluntary. You don't have to do these things, and you probably don't like doing these things, but you consent to do it because you recognize the product yield from that, which is your loved one is in the ground or burnt or whatever you decide to do with them, and their assets have been distributed. And so I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that you enjoy it. I mean, you can consent to things that you don't like doing, But, I mean, if you consent to it, then, I mean, whatever happens after that, you were a party involved. And if you sign your rights away in a contract, then that's nobody else's fault but yours. Now, whether or not the legitimacy of that contract, whether or not it would hold true is really left to up to and determined by, say, the private law organization that you hired.
Okay,
does business for you.
Alright, so you said a court could decide whether that was legitimate or not. But what authority do they have if they can't?
Well, you grant them authority. If you live in a society full of people, then there are going to be things that you're going to give to them. One of which is consent.
But how can they tell me what to do with my private property?
Well, they can't unless you tell them they can.
But if someone's my slave, typically that means they're your private property, as was in tradition. So how can someone tell me what I can and can't do with my private property? Why do they have special rights?
Who has special rights?
Well, one of your criticisms is of statism is some people have certain special rights. At least from what I've seen in that one video, where the guy said, alright, so, like, the police have special rights.
Yeah.
So the courts would have special rights because they can tell me what I can do with my private property, whereas I can't tell other people what they can do with their private property. And they would have authority over me in my private property.
Well, whether or not it's your private property, that's... because you can't steal still. So whether or not you're stealing... You would have to specify these things in the contract. Like, if you suddenly sign your rights away to me and become my slave, then whatever's in that contract then is what goes. It isn't now you becoming my slave. Does that mean all the assets that you've accumulated up until that point are yours too?
Probably not.
Probably not, because it doesn't say that in the contract, does it? So if your best course of action or your best preventative measure is to get it in writing to keep private
So
property.
how can you have private property without violence?
Without violence?
Yeah,
Trespassing.
Okay, so...
No, that is something wrong.
Alright,
That's
so
trespassing.
So trespassing, so I can enact violence over a trespasser.
You can defend yourself.
Alright,
yes.
so trespassing doesn't necessarily mean you're living on their land.
No, but it means you're trespassing.
Okay, so at what point do I decide someone's trespassing?
When they're on your land.
Okay, so any person, any guess? Or I'm just like, you know what? I'm trying to think. You could justify any... Well, I guess in some court we can figure that out. So with trespassing, you would have special rights over your land.
No, they're just rights. They're not special. There's nothing
They
special
wouldn't,
about
because
them.
they don't, that person that's trespassing
It's,
doesn't...
it's a human right to own property, to own land.
But when someone else crosses that onto my land, they
that infringes upon your right to own property.
They give up some of the rights by crossing into my land, right?
They give up their right? No,
So-
they're assuming new rights by doing it. By trespassing, you're assuming rights, which you're not supposed to do. You can't just assume rights against somebody else's
Okay,
will.
but in my position, say I own the land and they cross into my land.
Yeah, so they're
For my
trying to
position-
assume rights.
They give up.
They don't give up. They're assuming rights. It's like if I attacked you right now, I'm assuming the right to enact violence over you. You didn't give me that permission to do that. I just did it, regardless of whether or not you consented to it.
I can enact violence upon them.
You can defend yourself.
Yes.
Yes.
So they no longer have the right of life once they cross into my land.
Oh, well, that's really. I mean, since when it's your land, that ultimately becomes. That's your decision.
No, which is it? You're playing two sides of the fence.
No, because when it's your land, it's your rules. Whatever you choose to do, that's up to you.
Okay.
Violence. You can use force. You just can't initiate it. The second you initiate force, that's when you're in the wrong.
Okay, so you're agreeing that private property implies coercion.
What's your definition of coercion?
Use of violence.
Yeah.
Okay. So coercion doesn't cease to exist. Alright, so given that...
Coercion wouldn't cease to exist under any system.
So, okay.
Neither would bad people, or neither would crime.
Okay.
Or perhaps I should use another word.
Because
instead
crime
of
implies
crime.
a state.
Neither
Laws.
would bad people doing bad things, is what I should say.
Alright, so...
Yes, you can use force. You can use direct. If somebody's trying to rape you, you can use direct force on them. Okay, you're just not supposed to initiate violence. You're not supposed to initiate the force. Initiating the force, that's what's gonna fuck you. I thought would be cool is if I was driving and filming. Maybe somebody's filming me, and I was answering questions that people ask me about anarchism, which I should probably do now. I've done it earlier.
You're gonna use that as a cut?
I've done it earlier. I've answered questions, but I think I'm going to do it again. I asked you guys to ask me questions, or I said I invited you to ask me questions about anarchy, and I told you that I'd answer them on my show, and some of you did ask me questions. So some of them are up here, and some of them are on my phone. All right, so the first question was, so you're the Antichrist. That is not a question. Next question. What do you do differently as an anarchist that normal people wouldn't necessarily do? Okay. So, I don't vote. But here's the problem with saying that. I don't know if most people vote. Most people probably don't vote. So, saying that is probably meaningless. I'm against voting. How about that? Instead of not voting, I take it a step further and say fuck voting. Okay. Other than that, I do this show, which is spreading the message of voluntarism. I debate with people all the time.
have a question.
Champion agorism, counter economics as a means to combat the state. It's wonderful. If you've heard of dark coin or Litecoin or Bitcoin, that's all products of counter economics, and I think it's wonderful stuff, and I hope it someday becomes normal. So those are some things that I do differently that most normal people wouldn't do. Yeah, you have a question?
Okay, so you say fuck voting, but would you vote for something that limited the power of the state?
That is the only case in which I would say, if you want to do that, that's fine. Ron Paul does that a lot. He votes no on a lot of bills that even the ones that he knows are going to get passed, he says no anyway.
Okay.
He's been asked, why do you always say no? And he said, because I read them, he says. But yeah, I'm glad you asked that because I've been asked that before and I've seen other people answer that question, and I would feel inclined to agree with them, being very anti-state. So yes, if you are going to vote for somebody who's is not going to say yes to anything that the state wants to do, then sure, go ahead. Vote for them.
So you're not against voting then?
I don't condone voting because there are too many things you can't account for. Because a person could run a platform that says
not necessarily just voting for people, because a lot of times in local elections you're voting for propositions or for rulings the way the state's going to run your city or your county.
Well,
for example,
here's the problem though, because I think I know what you're getting at here, is that in a free society you would be voting basically for what you want. Well, here's the difference. It would have to be unanimous, and that's pretty much it. It would have to be unanimous. You'd have to come to some form of agreement, and compromise is very real. You're probably going to have to compromise. If you don't like compromising, then I would not condone living with other people, because you're going to have a hard time agreeing. But it would have to be unanimous.
what do you mean unanimous? Like Let me give an example of a proposition that was recent, like in Frisco. There was the funding for, it was like a concert hall, and the vote was, all right, we already agreed to pay money for it, but are we gonna continue paying for money for it, or are we gonna stop paying money for it?
Well, that shouldn't be it. That shouldn't even. Here's the problem with that, because the money from that was stolen anyway, so that wouldn't even be a problem in a free society.
But I'm just going with practicality, because the question is, what do you do differently from a normal person? And a normal person that lives in this community would vote for that or not vote for that.
A normal person wouldn't vote at all, probably. Most people don't vote, but.
But given in that scenario, when you're asked about voting, would you to stop paying for that, or would you vote to continue paying for that in the contract that was signed?
Well, here's the problem though with that. I still wouldn't vote, only because they're probably going to use, if they don't use the money on that, they're probably going to use it on something else. The way that budgets work is that if they don't spend all the money that they have in their budget, then they lose it. So in this way, that the state sort of incentivizes wasteful spending, or just spending for the sake of spending, which incentivizes wasteful spending. I was on Cop Block, which is one of my favorite Facebook pages. There was this lady.
What is Cop Block?
Cop Block?
Mm-hmm.
Cop Block is a Facebook page dedicated to, I guess, police brutality and them possibly overstepping their bounds.
Okay.
Some of the policemen on there are actually, they're very nice, and I hate the fact that their socialized police force is forced upon me, but if it has to, I would rather them be nice. So there was this lady, right, and she was in the desert, and she was collecting rocks, and here's where the wasteful spending comes in. There was a helicopter following her. There were like 3 police vehicles, right, and they were, asking her questions, and then there was a helicopter that kept circling. She was filming it so you could see, and that to me is just fucking bonkers. If they don't spend the money on that building, then what are they going to spend it on? Having joyrides in helicopters? No siree. Okay, so another question that I got asked was, how does anarchy prevent the government? And the answer to that is it doesn't.
That's what I was asking you. But then
yeah, I know, but it was a question that was asked from me, not also by you, but this was by somebody else.
Okay.
And I just thought I should answer it. I know it ties back to our original conversation, but yeah, anarchy does not prevent government because it's not a system. Another question asked of me was, when did I become an anarchist? Okay, so I was a libertarian from the ages of 18 to 19. That's when I identified officially as a libertarian. Before I was just kind of a more independent. I didn't have like a clear-cut position. And I guess when I got into college, I had this one professor who, he's one of my favorite professors, he's my history professor, and he recommended this one libertarian and anarchist, or at least hailed as a libertarian and anarchist scholar named Murray Rothbard, who's a big name amongst individualists. And so I basically read some of his pieces. I found other similar people like him, like Albert J. Nock, and then that's when I learned about Austrian economics, like F.A. Hayek. And upon liking those pages on Facebook, wonderful thing about Facebook, it allows sharing ideas and communicating with other people. It just makes it so easy. So I found this one page called Statism is Slavery, and there was this dude on it. They kept showing this dude, and his name was Michael Shanklin, and he would talk about voluntarism. I had no idea what voluntarism was, and then I learned that it was anarchy, and I thought, oh, well, I agree with a lot of things this guy's saying, but in the back of my mind, I'm like, yeah, but come on. We still need government, right? But it was because I didn't I had that doubt, which is fine. Having doubt is fine. That's great. But I had that doubt. I stuck with statism because I was unsure and I didn't know what anarchy had to offer, or at least what it could offer.
It doesn't offer. It's not a
Well,
system.
the potentials from having an anarchy, or from living in a free society. What could arise from that? I didn't see how people could interact with each other. I didn't see how order would exist until I started researching it. And upon researching it, I don't know how quick I don't know how long it takes for people to change ideologies, but I don't know if this is fast or not, but it took about like 2 months probably. I don't know if that's a long process for a lot of people, but it was right after I turned 20 when I became an anarchist, and I still am one, and I don't think I'm going to change anytime soon. So yeah, that's when I became an anarchist.
What's the next question?
Okay, the next question is the next question was what time does your show come on? Or when does your show air? That was the question. The show airs right now. So if you're watching it, then you got this memo.
When's the next show?
The next show it's on Friday. All my shows are on Friday at 11 to 11:30.
Eastern, Pacific?
New York.
Eastern time.
Yes.
10:30 Central, is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's when my show comes on. Then the other question was, what is your show about? My show is about promoting voluntarism and just giving opinions and my point of view on current events, ideas, topics, those sort of things. And also other people's point of views, because it's not just going to be me. I'm going to have guests. Like, he could be a recurring guest. Maybe. If he wants to be, that's up to him. I won't force it on him. It'll be on his own accord.
I'll have to give consent.
He has to give consent to it. So yeah, those are all the questions that I can remember from now. So I think right now I'll go to the interview that I had.
Was that dude?
Yeah, there's this guy that goes around, he walks up and down on the fucking hottest day on Main Street. Like every day.
I've seen him on El Dorado too.
Yeah, so I went and I saw him while I was driving home today. I said, I'm gonna interview this guy. So I was driving and I saw him. So I went and parked in Walgreens and I waited for him and I went and interviewed him.
Oh, that was at CVS.
Yeah, it was CVS. Yeah, it was CVS. Yeah, I parked at CVS. Both drugstores. And yeah, I interviewed him. And so this is that interview.
Be the best!
Alright, so
Be great, baby.
so what's your name?
Jimmy Lee Robinson. Jimmy Lee. Jimmy Lee.
It's really nice.
That's
to
me.
meet
What's
you.
your name?
My name's Nicholas.
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 Nicholas. God bless Nicholas,
So
Lord.
what do you do exactly?
I'm blessing the word. I love it, man.
I noticed you got
Bringing
that
peace to
sign.
the world. The day sign is peace be still. We need peace. There was too much war, too much anxiety. Come on. Think the best. Be optimistic. It can happen. The Bible said with man it's impossible, but not for God. For with God, all things are possible. It can happen. We can come together. We can change the world. We can feed the world.
Means that human beings should be able to do, they should be able to marry whoever they want. They should be able to eat whatever they want, and no one should force things on them.
I love it. Unconditional love.
Yeah.
Agape love.
Yeah. No one should be able to infringe upon their rights as a person, or their human rights, or their natural rights.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
You from
What do
God.
you think about that?
You from God.
Am I from
That's
God?
a message. You are from God. That's a message from God. I'm gonna make all the right moves and say all the right things to convince you that all we gotta do is come together and we solve all the problems. Solved. We got to evolve. When we evolve, We problem solve. Evolving your mind. That means you growing. That means you ain't closed-minded. You open to new things. You listen. Be a good listener, because listeners don't have to go through much as non-listeners do. That's why I say I love to listen to people, because everybody got wisdom, man. We can listen. We can hear, baby. And you got to hear something good. You got to bless your spirit. And when you're doing something good like this, my friend, God got to back you, man. He said when a man ways please the Lord, he make even his enemies to be at peace with him, man. In the name of love, my friend. Spirit, do your thing. Go ahead and do it, baby.
Thank you for being on my show.
God
Appreciate
bless.
it.